I want to clean the viewfinder eyepiece of the top cover here, and I'll do that with glass cleaner and cotton buds. Now the outside is easy. This eyepiece is glass. It's not easily damaged. The frame of course is plastic around here, so you don't want any solvents on it. The inside surface, cleaning the inside surface, that's more entertaining, and that's because you have these, I can see a bit of fluff there now. You have these two little metal bars sticking up, and they will tend to catch the cotton bud. You also have the lens held in with a spring. Now, where that spring sits, it will tend to grab the fibres off the cotton bud and jam them in there, which of course is undesirable. You don't want that. Yeah, it's just doing it to me there. Let me blow that out and see what I've got. There's just a little bit of speck of dust there in the middle of that lens, which I don't like the look of. That looks okay. Now the dial at the top here, the window at the top that goes over the meter, I'm also going to wipe that out. Gently, because that's plastic and it scratches easily. That looks okay. I've got my top cover all cleaned now. Check the final things. Well, the final thing here is to make sure that the viewfinder eyepiece is clean. Fit the shield that goes round the meter there itself. Fit the top cover down and check that everything looks good. If it looks good, screws can be fitted. That one there, I've got a special screwdriver for tightening that up. There are two screws at this end of the top cover, chrome plated. And the rules for tightening those screws up is don't slip. And the second rule is don't slip. If you make a mess of it, you won't be pleased. That screw doesn't want to seat. This top cover's not pulling down far enough. No, we're away. So this screw here on the top I need to tighten up. I'll find my screwdriver to do that shortly, but I don't need to be doing it immediately. On the top of the camera here, we can put our rewind knob in place. The rewind knob, I've reassembled that. Basically there was not much to it. All I had to do was make sure that the surfaces were clean, put a little bit of synthetic grease on the wavy washer and tighten that thing back up. That was tightened up with a screwdriver like this, or one of its mates that I've got here. But as for putting the knob back on the camera, once that's done, something through the fork of the rewind and just tighten it with your fingers. That's all that's required. The meter setting button. I should be able to get that in with my fingers, and then I'm going to use I'm just going to use a pair of rubber gloves on there to get a grip on that and tighten that as tight as I can get it by hand. I'm not going to put a tool on it. It's not required. What's that bring us to? Well, I think that just about brings us to leatherettes. So we'll have a talk about leatherettes. Well, here's the leatherettes from the front of the camera. Now, these were odd. They came off quite easily. The adhesive is impervious to my usual solvent that I can use for something like this, which is the Naphtha. I don't use anything stronger than that. But it doesn't make any impression on this stuff at all. So I started on this one, just scraping the adhesive away because it's hard. It's a hard, shiny layer. But basically it's torn a little bit right at that spot there. That fingerprint mark that I mentioned before we took the camera apart. There's obviously some damage there, and you can see right through it at this stage. So I had to consider my options at this stage. I mean, the leatherette on this side doesn't look too awful, but it suffers from the same sorts of distortions, and obviously it's not as flexible as it should be, and I can't get that rubbish off. I spent a long time, I suppose I spent 25 or 30 minutes scraping at this to get it as far as I did. I'm not confident that I'll be able to get it all the way, particularly when I get down to an area like this, where it's quite narrow and obviously it has less strength, and just the force that you're putting in order to scrape that surface off is likely to end up tearing the leatherette away. So I've decided that I'll have to put something else on there instead. So those leatherettes, I won't throw them away. They can go in my bin of spare leatherettes. That little thing there we need. But I've got some other leatherettes to go on there that I found in my parts boxes, which are much nicer. The leatherette from the base of the camera is in good enough condition. Likewise the patch for the film advance and the little patch that goes over the shutter release button. The front ones are no good, but I've got these. Now these appear to be new old stock. They look very nice indeed, so that's what I'm going to use. So I'll just clear the decks and get ready to put these in place. Okay, so I'll remove the shutter release button. This little metal disc is to cover this hole in the front plate, which you can probably hardly see there. But yeah, you can just about see there's a hole in the front plate. So I'll just glue that in position first. And I'll do that by putting a little bit of adhesive on this piece of paper, using a toothpick to transfer it to that disc. So I just want some of this around the edges. It's not going anywhere. This is underneath the leatherettes, so it's not going to fall out and get lost. It sits down into that recess like that. And the leatherettes for the front. Okay, we might as well start on that side since we're here. There's a tiny thread hanging off the end of that leatherette. I'll just remove that. Let's get some adhesive on here. Now if you're doing it in a neat and tidy fashion, you would transfer your adhesive to a piece of paper first and then move it to your leatherette on a toothpick. But if you're in a mad rush and you're feeling very confident, you can put it straight on the leatherette, spread it out, and make sure you get good cover on the edges, particularly corners. If leatherettes are going to peel up, they're always going to peel up from an edge. It's not a thing to peel up from the centre. This leatherette being new, the adhesive is probably going to soak into that, to the weave of the fabric, more than used leatherettes. So I'm pretty generous with it here. You probably wouldn't need to be as generous as this usually. And I've been over generous, I can see that. You get rid of that excess. And I'm making sure there's no lumps and bumps and puddles of adhesive, because they will not be an advantage to you. That's looking good. The camera body back in. I've got this stuck to my finger already. Get that on the front. Now this needs to go neatly around that opening for the shutter release button. Leatherettes, of their nature, they tend to shrink, so often they're very tight around something like that. If you don't press them down into place neatly, they'll sit up. And if they sit up, then that button will not slide smoothly over the top of them as it should do. So anytime you've got leatherettes going around a flash sink boss or something like that, just take extra care to make sure that they're actually tucked down neatly, because otherwise the edges will be curled up. It's just the nature of things like that, and you have to fight against it. Now I'm just rubbing the adhesive that's come out from around the edges with this toothpick that I used to apply the adhesive, and it basically just sticks to the toothpick and lifts off the leatherette. That's looking good. So that piece of leatherette's on nice and neat. That should be good. I can put the shutter release button back on there now. Just checking that that moves smoothly. That seems good. The leatherette on this side next. So it's the same deal. I'll just turn this over so I'm not fighting with that patch of glue. Take my leatherette. The adhesive I'm using is designed as a contact adhesive. This stuff's called ADOS F2. You probably won't find it where you are. An outfit called Bostik makes something that's quite similar. Plyobond is another one. One of the important things about any of these adhesives is if it contains a lot of particularly enthusiastic solvents, and MEK is the one that comes to mind, that'll actually soften up the plastic of the leatherettes and ruin them. So adhesives that are made for, intended for sticking vinyl, for example, they can contain solvents of that nature which will very much damage the leatherettes. I think that's looking good. Just open the door. Make sure this is tucked down neatly against that edge. Yeah, so traditionally a contact adhesive, what you do is you apply it to both faces and then you wait until it has dried off a bit, gone to a tacky stage. When it's just at the tacky stage, then you take your two pieces and you slap them together, whereupon they instantly bond and are removable and can't be adjusted, but they stick very well. Don't try and use contact adhesive on leatherettes using that method, because you need to be able to adjust the position of them to get them seated just right. And if you use the contact adhesive in that method, applying it to both faces and having it instantly stick, it will instantly stick in exactly the wrong place. And you have to peel it all off again and start again. Okay, at the front of the camera, let's put this tiny patch on the shutter release while we're here, and then turn my attention to the base of the camera. So that little patch is there. I'm not going to squirt directly onto that with the glue because it would be too much. Where is my toothpick gone? It's escaped. There it is. So pick up a little bit of adhesive on the toothpick. Ensure that it's evenly applied to that tiny patch. Wipe off any excess because you don't want loads of it squeezing out and going in places you don't want it. There's a thread hanging off the end of that. Get this in a position that you can see, and that just sits in that little recess there, not on my finger. That's the other thing, is as you use this adhesive you'll get it on your fingers and your fingers become the other half of the contact adhesive surface. So as soon as you touch something to it, it'll stick. Okay, so that's looking good. That's our front of our camera. Leatherettes in place, looking pretty neat. And that leaves us with the base of the camera to deal with. Take off my film advance lever. Get this propped up on something because it's very keen to fall over. Stay. It's going to stay. It's agreed to. Right, there we had a piece of tape across there just to cover that hole. Basically that tape only exists to stop the leatherettes dimpling down over those holes in the base plate. Well, fortunately for us, we have some tape left over. From doing the viewfinder stuff. So I'll see if I can get a piece of this cut. It's not too big. That'll do nicely. I don't want too big a piece there. I've got no idea how well the adhesive would stick to that tape. Leatherette for the base plate. Now that leatherette's the original one. It was only held on very loosely to the camera. In fact it was completely loose on the camera, but it had never been stuck down well. I don't know why. It didn't appear that it had ever had much adhesive put on it at all, which is weird. So perhaps someone was running out of adhesive. Perhaps they were just too tentative and putting it on the base plate. We'll just never know. On the leatherette, you always put the adhesive on the leatherettes, not on the metal. Alright, I'm going to put some adhesive on the paper this time. Do it in the tidy fashion. Pick it up with the toothpick. Rub it onto the leatherette. These leatherettes on the base plate are a bit fiddly to deal with because there's so many holes, there's so many little narrow pieces of leatherette that you need to get the adhesive on. But working this way from a piece of paper allows me a lot more control. If it was the base plate of a 3C, for example, there's hardly any holes on there. I'd put a lot just directly on the base, on the leatherette, and then spread it. Here I've just got to be a bit more circumspect about how I go about doing that. I mean, look at the edge there, that's very narrow. I'm working as quickly as I can because I don't want the adhesive to go completely dried off at the other end by the time I get down here and get this lot done. Oh, that's a bit clumsy. Okay, that'll do. Get that off. Bring the camera back in. Stands camera. Get that in position. Now it's of the nature of leatherettes to shrink. So make sure that you've got them smoothly fixed around raised bosses like there and here and here, and of course the back catch release at this end. You can, I'd say that leatherette's probably shrunk about a millimetre in length, a bit more perhaps. Fortunately it's fairly pliable, so it's not causing me any problems. Just checking it's all down firmly. That all looks pretty good to me. It looks a little bit odd right there. I'm not sure why that should be. Is that where our tape was? Oh, it could be. It could be just the thickness of the tape we're seeing under it there. Get these 3 screws in the film advanced lever, tighten them down. And the leatherette patch for the lever. Now the leatherette does have a grain or a pattern to it. You can get that lined up pretty well if you take the time. Actually, with worn leatherette it's more easy to see where the pattern is because you can see the grain of the weave of the fabric through the plastic. If the leatherettes are in very, very good condition and they're not very worn at all, you may not be able to see that exactly. Okay, so I've got my patch. I can see the weave and it runs in that direction across the base. So I'll line that up with that. Get that reasonably centered up on that recess if you can. And that is the leatherettes, which doesn't leave us with much. The back catch cover. It's here. Now that was very stained. Corrosion, I expect. It was a little bit ugly with it, and all I've done with this is clean it in the ultrasonic, and then I've attacked that with some very fine paper, probably about 500 grit, and then 800 grit, and then I've just polished it with metal polish, and it looks quite good. It's not the original finish, but the original finish was effectively gone. Yeah, excuse me here, I'm just flinging pieces left, right, centre. See if I can get these pieces together. I put 1 screw through, it goes through here, the longer of the slots, the one with a little tab at the end of it, and then I can fit its return spring in there. Now one end of the return spring goes against the screw shaft, the other end goes on that tiny tab on the lever. Try not to get it flinging across the workbench. And it should sit like that. Now that is just a time bomb waiting to go. So I've got to get this over this post, down in position, and get that screw in there. Now do the screw up lightly, check that the lever moves smoothly, and if it does, things are going very well. Put the other screw in, run that down, again lightly, check that this moves smoothly. If everything's good, tighten the 2 screws. Now the screws are only quite small, chromed brass, easily damaged, don't make a mess of it. But at this stage the camera's all back together, works nicely, the finder's clean, the meters reads accurately, the leatherettes look good, well they should do because they're new old stock, the original leatherettes on the base of course, and of course we didn't even need to attack the leatherettes on the back. I'll just tighten this button up here with a pair of rubber gloves on to get as much torque on there as I reasonably can with bare hands, or almost bare hands. I've already used my screwdriver to tighten up that screw on the top cover there. And that is a Reflex 3 stripped down, cleaned, lubricated and ready to go. Thanks for watching.